video, we just added a simple little spinner object so that we could, do some preventative work for our users. Basically, when the user logged in the last video, we've added in the spinner object so they couldn't accidentally type something that was an invalid value. So now when we look at this, we have sort of a view here that would be typical of an administrator's type view, and over time what we'll do is we'll only allow administrators to see this view. But one of the things an administrator might want to know is, well, how many hours per month are the volunteers logging? And what's the trend over time? Well, it's hard to see that information from a table, right? So in a table format, we can't see trending type data easily. But if we had, say, a bar chart, we could see for each month, what's the, how many hours have been logged, and we could decide if that is then we could see if the trend's going up or trend's going down or what have you. So that's what we're going to do here, is we're going to create a new scene. We'll add another button to our view here, and the idea is that when you click on this button, it's going to take you to a view that allows you to see the total hours worked each month by our volunteers. So let's get to it. So we'll create a new view, and let's call it monthly hours view. Use the Java controller. We'll use our custom cascading style sheet. Finish. Let's build the view first. So we're going to launch Scene Builder. Go to our anchor pane. Make it the same size as all the others, which was 800 by 600. And on here, really, we're just going to have this graph and the back button. That's all it's going to do for now, anyways. Maybe we'll add some other features later. So if we go to charts, you can see there's several different charts already built into Java, or into Scene Builder anyways. And if we just drag it on, place it there, you'll see it gives you a default X and Y coordinate. And if we look over here in the bar chart area, you can see if you click on it, you can actually see there's a category axis and a number axis. So the categories across the bottom, numbers across the side. And then we can configure it from here. And the other thing we're going to add in was a button to say back. So let's add in some configuration here. So if we go to our code section, we can define our IDs right from the beginning. We'll say bar chart, and a category axis across the bottom. Doesn't handle this part well, does it? Huh. Sorry, I was just noticing it didn't update this nicely here. But let's call this hours worked. And that, the horizontal axis, out the months. Then we can just grab these predefined items for us. So again, I went to View, Show Sample Controller Screen, and I'll just grab these, saves me typing them out later. And then when I come back into NetBeans here, I go to my controller, and then I can just paste these right in. And if I do Control-Shift-I, it brings up all the suggested imports. Say OK. I like to just bring them all together. It's a personal preference, not a mandatory one. And The other thing that we need to do with this is we need to add in something called a series. So the chart's going to be populated with the series. So I'm going to say private by chart series, and I'll call it the series. So this is our actual bar chart, the category access, the number access, and here's the series that goes into it. So in the initialize method, we need to set up our variables here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say series equals new XY chart. And then we can set up the bar chart with several different things. So, for example, we can say bar chart, set the title, and we can say hours worked. I'm probably going to turn this off later. I just want to show you that some of these features exist. And we could add in things like months. Set the label for those. And we can set the label on the vertical axis as well. And then at this point, we will have an actual bar chart, but we don't have much in it. So let's just put in a couple pieces of dummy data, just so we can see what it's doing, and then we're going to do a database query to actually populate this. So this is just quick example data here. Say series, and what you do is you get the data, so you get an observable list back. Okay, this is much the same way we populate tables. You get an observable list back, and then we can add in new XY chart data. And here we're going to put in two values, right? So the first one is going to be the month name. So here, this is our horizontal one. So let's put in a value like, I don't know, phones. And put in 10. And then we'll add something else to our series here. We'll call it computers. I don't know, maybe this is an inventory chart or something in 14. And then what we do is, now that we have this series, we say we have our bar chart, which again, it's going to have this observable list. So we say bar chart, get the data, and add all, and put in our series. Okay, so we're going to populate the series object, and then we're going to add it to our bar chart. So let's just add a quick button so we can even get to this screen. So if we go to volunteer table view controller, I think we have that up here. Yeah. So we've got a vertical box, a horizontal box. So let's add in another horizontal box here. Went to the top, don't know why. Then we'll add in a button. And this button will make it the same size, everything else, just 250. And clicking on properties, we can say view monthly view hours report. It's okay. Excellent. And then all we have to do, oh, it's a little bit bigger, isn't it? Okay, so let's just chop that down a little. $250. Interesting. Okay, do that. Okay, so now in the controller for this, we've added a button. So in the controller, we need to tell this system what to do when the button is pushed. So we go to our table view controller, and in here, change scenes. Then we use our scene changer object that we created. So we're going to do scene changer. And we can change scenes, and we don't have to pass any information in, so we can just use our simple scene changer or change scenes method. So the view that we want to go to is called the monthly hours view.fxml, and we'll give it a title of view hours. Add a throw clause, because again, we're loading this file, so that means there's a potential for an input-output exception. Hit save. And then we just have to connect this method, oops, in our view. Click on here, go to code, and on action, we want the monthly hours button pushed. Save. So now, when we run, should just get a really simple graph right now. Oh, but we don't. Something blows up. So let's take a look. What happened here? Okay, in the initialize method, we got a null pointer exception on line 33. So let's go to that. Bar charts. Interesting. So, we did not save our bar chart, seems. Let's try that again. And again, it's not bad to get errors, because the better you are at troubleshooting them, faster coding gets. So this obviously has nothing to do with our volunteer hours, but it does show that we were able to populate a value of 10 for phones and 14 for computers, and we could get 2 items in here. Now if we added a third thing, I don't know, game controllers. Let's go to here. As an example, if we had programmers, so maybe there's more of those things than anything. Right now, if we were to run this we would get a third third item, and you'll see it automatically will scale this thing as things come along. So what we want to do now is, rather than hard coding in these values, right now what we're doing is we're hard coding in each of these items. What we really want to be able to do is read from the database. So what that would mean is I would need the database to produce a results set. It would have, for example, January, and then it would have the number of hours worked in January from all of our volunteers. And then it would have February, return the number of hours worked by our volunteers. That's what we want to see. So in order to do that, we're going to have to create a query in SQL here to return the information we want. Now, we don't actually have a lot of interesting data in our table right now. Our table is filled with basically things from November. So I'm going to put in some dummy data here. So we're going to say insert into hours worked. Volunteer ID, hours worked, and the date worked. Okay, so those are the fields we're going to populate. And we'll say values. And let's use volunteer ID. Let's pick on number 12 here. They work 8 hours. And the date. I can just pull a bunch of these. And I can play with the dates. There we go. That's some data. Okay, it looks like it went in okay. So now if I look at my data, I need to create a query that's going to give me information per month. So what I want to do is I want to sum up the hours worked based on the month. So I could say select month name, date worked, and I could say sum of the hours worked from our table, hours worked. Ooh, that's a terrible naming convention I have, isn't it? Huh. Table and one of the column names is the same. That's not a great combination, but we'll make it work. And then what we do is we can say group by. We can say month, date worked. We should probably add in a year field, but since this is all just 1 year, do that. When I do that, what I can see is in January we had 40 hours worked, February was 24 hours worked, March had 32 hours worked, April 32, November was 20. So, ideally you'd want data for a whole year, but this will be enough for us to start to populate our grid in our view. And that's really what this video is about. So our first column is going to give us the month name. The second column is going to give us the hours worked in that month. And again, we really should do this by year. This is going to just do it by month. It should be month and year is the group by. Actually, we could do it. We'll just say this, year. Add in the 2 criteria. Here it doesn't matter. Do this. just make it a little bit more robust over time. That way, if all of a sudden we had some data previous years, add in some other records here. Just add in some items from other years. Now when we run our query, it'll keep these hours from January separated out into the different years. If I didn't include this piece right here, what you would see is the hours for January would be 40, 64, looks like about 60 hours total here, or 80 hours. Terrible math, right? Because it thinks it's all in 1 year. So we need to add this extra bit in. There we go. So it'll break it out. So this is the query that we want. Whoops. So it returns the data we want. So what we need to do now is we need to add this into our controller class. So let's go back into NetBeans here. So in our controller class before, we had this initialize method, and we populated our series here. So what I'm going to do is let's just switch keywords here. One sec. I'm going to comment that out. And what I'm going to do is create a little method that says populate series from database. What that'll do is inside this method, we're going to set the series, and then we can add it and get it to run. The reason that I don't do it inside of the initialize method is A, I think this is a little cleaner to read, but B, and more importantly, is it throws a SQL exception, or it has the potential to throw a SQL exception. And because this is overriding an abstract method, I can't throw in a throws clause here. So it's just a little cleaner to do it as a separate method. Okay, let's get the results from the database. We're going to do our normal things, connection. And we'll create a connection object. Whoops. And here we can just use a statement. We're not using anything from the user hasn't provided us any data. So we can actually just use a statement instead of a prepared statement. And we're going to have something called the result set. That's going to be the data returned from the database. We covered these in a previous video. I'm going to say con equals what we're going to do is pass in the location of our database and the type. So we've got JDBC, right? So it's a Java database connection. We're going to use the MySQL connector. We're going to use localhost 3306. And then we have to provide our table name, which is volunteer. And we're going to put in our username and password, which I have set up as student and student. That's the SQL exception. So we're going to, down here, we'll say catch SQL exception. Okay, so now we can connect to our database. And I like to do this as a string. I feel it's a little easier to read it. So I'm going to say and in here, this is basically where I'm going to put our query. Oops. Now, the only downside to doing it this way is it assumes that you want these little line returns in there. So you can get rid of the line returns, but make sure to keep the spaces at the end. Otherwise, what happens is it'll actually put like from and attach it right next to here, and then you'll get an error. So this is our SQL, and then we can execute our query. Right? So for execute the query. Okay, so we're going to just run the query, which is this. That's going to return us 3 rows. And what we're going to do is loop over the result set and add to our series. Other things to add, use our series. So it's going to look just like what we did up here, right? Where we say get data, add this. So let's put that right down here. Okay. Now what's different is we want the month name here. Okay. So if we look at this, our month name is column number 2. So here I'll say result set string in column 2. Similarly, this we want to be a number, so I can say result set the integer in column 3. Okay. So when this is all done running, I want to make sure that everything's closed down. So we looped over the results, and so we're going to add in a finally block here. Finally, we want to make sure that our con, so we're going to say if con is not equal null, connection be closed. Okay, and that where this possibility comes in is if we triggered an exception up here, right? We wouldn't necessarily close down this connection. So add a throws clause, and we do the same thing for our statement. And the same thing for our result set. Okay. So we no longer need that. Okay. Now, we have this potential that our method's going to throw a SQL exception. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say try populate from the database and catch exception. Okay, so again, the only difference here is that rather than hard coding in phones, computers, and whatnot, we say populate the series from the database. We open a connection. We create our SQL statement. We execute the query. We loop over it, and for each item that's returned, we're going to add that to our data, right? So every month should give us something new. This will actually be a little interesting. I haven't piloted it with the extra year in here, so I think we're not handling that just yet. So, well, let's run it and see what we get. We're going to have a few Januaries, I think is what we're going to see. But here, oh, okay, we got just, so we see there's our labels have been added, the months, January, February, March, April, November. And it looks quite good. Most likely because this is the last January that was returned. So we need to add in other series to handle the different years. So we can show that as well. But I'll do that in the next video series. Last things last, if we don't love the color orange, there is a way to change that. And it's actually in our CSS. So let's just quickly jump to our CSS for a second. So in here, if we didn't love the color of that, we can change it quite easily here. We can say chart-bar, they call it. And what we can say is X R fill blue. Now when we run, it's blue. Okay. The other thing we could consider doing is cleaning this up a bit, because right now it's not using our standard kind of label as a nice header. So the other thing we can do here, if we go back into our view, we can add in a couple of our typical things we've been doing. So we can add in vertical box, we can add in a label, add in our bar chart. Do a couple little cleanup items here. So our label, seems like it's stuck here. Let's just hit save. Sorry, I just looked like our scene builder was having a little problem there. Oops, that's not what I wanted. So for our label, I wanted to say hours worked, but I wanted to use our CSS styling. So in here, I'm going to say that's our header, and our VBox, I want, rather than everything to be top left, let's go top center, and everything else looks okay to me. Save. And then we can come back into our controller class. And up here, we no longer need to set the title. We can just comment that out, hit save. Now it should just be a little bit more consistent with how everything else looks. Right, so our header is kind of consistent, hours worked. There we go. That's looking nice. And then as you keep adding months, basically all it's going to do is going to make these bars a little bit narrower, and it'll blend it in. All right, thanks very much.